I'm joined now by a young man who really needs no introduction to Notre Dame football fans, but nonetheless, he gets one. Tommy Rees joins us here. Tom, the former quarterback at Notre Dame and now the quarterback's coach. First of all, welcome back. I know it's been a whirlwind couple weeks for you, but what has it been like being back here at Notre Dame?
Well, thank you. It's been great being back. It's home for me. There's a certain level of comfort and, kind of hit the ground running here over the last couple weeks, but it's an exciting time and it's something I'm really looking forward to.
You hit the ground running because today's National Signing Day and there's so little time to kind of wrap up the process. But you guys do that today, and you do so by bringing in a quarterback in Avery Davis, who is a kid that is very highly thought of as a dual threat guy. I'm curious your impressions of him as a football player.
Yeah, just watching him, the first thing that stand out are his feet. He's a mobile guy and he can move around, but his feet within the pocket, being able to extend some plays, make some throws, step up and feel the rush has been really impressive. He's got a quick release and he can drive the ball downfield. So, they did a great job of, getting him in the boat here, and excited about the opportunity to work with him and love everything I've seen on film and just talking to him and getting to know him. It seems like a great kid, and I know he's excited and we're happy for him, and this is a great day that he should celebrate.
In terms of looking at him moving forward, what do you find is the biggest challenge for a quarterback, especially a young quarterback, getting on the field? And ideally, a young quarterback doesn't have to go on the field, but as you know better than anyone, sometimes that happens.
Right. I think our job to prepare him will start first mentally. I think the game really takes a jump from high school mentally, more so than just physically, especially at the quarterback position. They have to be prepared to, know the whole offense, know the ins and outs, and that's something we'll work on when he gets here. And I think that's the biggest step, especially at the quarterback position. And then, once you understand what's going on, that's when the game can really slow down. People always talk about the speed of the game. That's less has to do with physical than it does mental, especially at the quarterback position. I think as you start to understand what you're doing and what the defense is doing, that's when everything can really slow down for them.
Now, you also have two guys that are under your tutelage right now that you're preparing to get ready for this season in your quarterback room. Starting with Brandon Wimbush, who's seen some time on the field, but not in a while. What does he bring to this offense?
Yeah, Brandon, first of all, is a great kid. Just spending some time with him, all the intangibles, all the things you want off the field are there. His teammates respect him. They enjoy being around him. The players have really shown that. The physical traits are all there. Everything you want, he checks the box. I think it's, starting from a little bit of a clean slate. He hasn't had a whole lot of playing time in situations that are, necessary, but I think that just, gaining that trust and gaining that knowledge of the offense, of what the defense is trying to do, is the next step for him, because he needs to get ready to play. And, when you're not asked to do a lot of things, week in and week out, sometimes that can fall behind. But I think he's really eager to learn, and he's excited about the opportunity. And, I'm excited to work with him.
If he ends up being the starting quarterback, he'll have the luxury of an offseason and a preseason to prepare for, something you didn't have when you were thrown in as a freshman. How much learning happens in that first full spring and summer before you play a full season?
Right. Just going back to when I played, I remember things really clicking in the summer. Spring ball, you're kind of taking water by a fire hose, and you're learning everything so quickly and just trying to know, hey, I got class now, I got to get to the Goog, what's, the day-to-day operation. Once the summer came and we were throwing as a team and just with each other, that's when the offense really started clicking, and I felt like I started seeing things better on the field. So, Brandon's had, maybe 2 years now within, this program where he's learned how things work on a day-to-day basis, and just moving forward, I think that will help once camp comes. And I think really, having that leadership role heading into the off season in the summer, help him just be more confident and gain, some more trust with his receivers and his own linemen. And because there's a little bit of an adjustment there for the other guys. It's a new guy behind center, and, if he's the guy, then you got to hit the ground running with him and get started.
Another young man you have in your quarterback room right now is Ian Book, who we were talking about during signing day last year. In terms of his skill set as a quarterback, what do you see as his strengths?
He's a good athlete, and that's the thing that people may not realize. He moves around well. Just looking at him through winter workouts, he's got great feet. He's got a strong lower body, which is really important with the quarterback, because one, you throw with your lower body, but also being able to get out of trouble. Just going back, watching some of his throws from camp and individual drills, and I'm really impressed with his motion. He's got a quick release, it's compact, and he's been a pleasure to be around. He's all ears right now. He's really eager to be in the role he has, and try to compete and work for some playing time. And I think when you have a kid like that who's eager and excited about the opportunity to play, that really makes the whole room great, and it makes my job a little bit easier, because how important it is to him.
As you get into the playbook with these young quarterbacks moving forward and you look through it, how familiar is it to you?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot that I forgot. I was a little bit surprised. I've been in a couple offenses since here, but I opened up the playbook and everything, came, back pretty easily. And Coach Kelly's run a system for a long time that's been successful. And, the verbiage, there have been some additions and some new things that I had to pick up on. But, the nuts and bolts of the offense are still there. And, even the quarterbacks, we've talked a little bit, and me remembering the signals, remembering some of the plays, they're not going to be able to trick me, and they're not going to say, hey, we used to call this or signal it this way, because a lot of the signals I came up with, so they're not going to be able to pull anything on me in that sense.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for a young quarterback being thrust into Brian Kelly's system, whoever that ends up being? What's probably the biggest obstacle for them to overcome to be successful?
Well, it's a quarterback-centric system, so a lot of the duties fall on the quarterback, and I think really when it comes to protections and checks and things like that is where a quarterback needs to, gain that knowledge. Coach Kelly's system is quarterback friendly, though. It's very direct. It's very, black and white, to the point where, hey, exactly what each play is, meant to do and where your read takes you. So I think understanding when the defense is doing something a little bit differently and having to protect myself or having to get to a good run check, I think that's where the obstacles come. But I think a lot of quarterbacks look forward to that. I know I did. I've talked to Deshaun. That was something he took a lot of pride in. But being able to have the pen last and get your team in the right play, I think is something that a lot of quarterbacks look forward to.
You can do a lot of book work in the offseason. You can do a lot of practice rests, but the one thing I don't think you can ever prepare a kid for is what it's like to play in Notre Dame Stadium on Saturday, particularly at that high profile and in an important position. How will you advise these guys how to handle it when their turn comes?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is I can give them some of my own insight. And then I've said before, I think the best thing we can do to prepare them for that is to make practice and make the meeting room, a competitive atmosphere and challenging for those guys. That way, when Saturdays come, they can slow down. They know, hey, I've prepared for this in practice. It was, pressure packed in the meeting room, so that way, it really slows down for them on Saturday. And that honestly is one of the bigger challenges. You got to, once football comes and once the season comes here, Notre Dame fans are great, but you got to be locked into what's going on in here and locked in with your teammates. And, the priorities really got to be, how can I be the best teammate and the best player for this team instead of, not getting caught up in all the outside noise.
Because you're new to the staff, you're just kind of wrapping up this recruiting class, but moving forward, you'll no doubt have a much larger role in that. As you recruit quarterbacks going forward and you sit down in a living room with a young man and his parents, what will you tell him about coming to school here and why it's the best decision for them?
Yeah, it's an extremely special place, and you don't realize that until you step on campus. And the people you meet here and the relationships you build are things that will last you a lifetime. That's already come to fruition for me, and I've been gone for 4 years now. I think that the quarterback position especially has so much tradition here and is a very special thing. There are only so many guys that can say it, and one of them is Joe Montana. Obviously Deshaun had a great career. Coach Paulus is upstairs. The list goes on and on. So to keep that tradition going, to have that kind of brand and have that kind of responsibility is something that any competitive quarterback is going to want. And to put on that gold helmet and to lead that team out of the tunnel is something that is an extremely special gift, and one that I think quarterbacks really take seriously.
You mentioned that fraternity a little bit. A lot of I've asked you many times what it's like being the Notre Dame quarterback. What's it like being a former Notre Dame quarterback?
It's good. You still get recognized every once in a while. I'm not Brady Quinn. I'm not rocking around like a GQ model, but you still get recognized, and guys still reach out. And when you step on campus and you're back in the Notre Dame community, people really take notice, and it's an extremely humbling gift to have, an extremely humbling situation to know that your actions as a player has impacted so many people. But the other great part is that you get to connect with the guys that are now here playing. So you step back on campus. Before I was here, hey, I can talk to Brandon, I talk to Deshaun, and they want to listen, and other guys on the team want to listen. So it's something that I take seriously. A lot of our alumni take seriously, especially quarterbacks. We kind of formed a really special bond over the years, and the whole Red Army thing has taken on a life of its own. And I think that just signifies how close knit this team is, and especially this position group.
You're young in your coaching career now. I'm curious, as you start to find yourself in your style, what kind of a coach do you find yourself being as you kind of step back and evaluate yourself as coach?
Yeah. I'm demanding. I really think I am. And, I'm a very competitive person. And that's one thing. I love competitive people, and I love to be around them. So if somebody doesn't want to compete, or if somebody, wants to take a back seat, that's really not going to fly with me. I feel like I've built great relationships with my teammates and the players I've coached over the last couple of years in the past, and that's something I continue to look forward to do. I think I can pretty much connect with anyone from a different walk of life and, really build, a good, mature relationship, one where they trust me and I trust them. And, I'm going to be hard on them. I'm going to get after them a little bit, but at the same time, I want them to know, all I have, is their best interest in mind. And, that's something that's really important to me, and to know that I have their back with whatever comes.
In terms of being a leader, that's not something you can force. You can't just tell a guy, take charge of a team, but it's something that's important from the quarterback position. I know you've indicated that you see that from Brandon, at least. How important do you think that is, that whoever your quarterback is takes ownership of the team to the extent that one player can?
Yeah, I think it's, a crucial factor of playing quarterback position. You never want to force them to be something they're not. So you got to figure out what their leadership style is, and then have them, grow in areas they need to, but also embrace their own style. If they're a leader by example, great. Be the first one in line. Be the first guy there. Be at everything. Show your teammates how important it is to you. If they're a vocal guy and they want to get after some people and, really be that rah-rah type of person, that's great too. Know the moments, know how each player is going to react to it, know who can take it, who can't, and lead that way. And if you have a combination of both, that's even better, and you can do both those things. And I think it's important, but I also think it's important to understand, your own leadership style and how that can affect other people.
All right. Well, Tom, it's great to have you back. Always fun talking to you. We enjoyed watching him as a player. We're going to enjoy watching him coach in the future here at Notre Dame. That's Tommy Rees, the quarterback's coach. And now, Jack, we're going to throw it back to you.